So this is both exciting in some sense of the word and frustrating to how do we get at this issue. And so this is not one that I would associate directly with your Hill asks, other than to say that the NIH, because there's no particular intellectual property associated with these lifestyle studies, there's no intellectual property there. These are tended not to be supported by industry. So these tend to be NIH-supported trials. So the NIH investments that you'll be asking for will be supporting much more research in this area. Why doesn't the government get involved? The National Academy of Sciences recently had a report saying current evidence is not telling us which ones of these interventions actually are a causative factor for preventing Alzheimer's disease. Lancet Commission, the European publication, did one where they said, with a degree of much more optimism, there is strong evidence that it might provide some prevention of Alzheimer's disease. So the scientific field sort of right now is uncertain about the causative relationship between these lifestyle changes and the prevention of Alzheimer's, other than to say there seems to be a correlation between a good lifestyle and delay of the age of onset. So the studies that Laura Baker's involved in and the HANDS study, I thought it was called the Pointer study, the worldwide effort to get at these multimodal lifestyle interventions, these studies will take about a year to year and a half, maybe 2 years to read out, and we'll have much more direct evidence of whether or not one or more or common or multiple modality interventions actually are a cause of the delay in the age of onset of Alzheimer's, or potentially even the capacity of these lifestyle interventions, rigorously enforced, actually reverse the biology and hence the course of the disease. Now that's very exciting, but this is sort of at the edge of it. So the question about, gee, we should ask the United States government. The United States government as a whole is not sure yet. With that said, that comes on us. We have to take a lead to figure out how to raise sort of the whole discussion of brain health to another level. And we will have some announcements in that regard in the coming months, and how to do that and how to think about it, and what kinds of tools and incentives and medical education, how to change the culture of the primary care office and the nurse practitioner and the physician's assistant, and what kinds of barriers they see in getting much more widespread awareness on the part of primary care physicians and the tools and incentives needed to change behavior. But that's something that's on us at the moment because the United States government yet does not believe it. With that said, there's a multiple pieces of the United States government you might persuade. NIH is one, they're doing the studies. CDC is another, Ian Kremer made reference to it before. The Prevention Services Task Force right now doesn't think a screening is appropriate at any age to sort of screen for Alzheimer's. So there are multiple agencies involved, there are multiple branches of government, and eventually we may have Congress basically do something more aggressive here. But right now, this is sort of on us, and we'll be out with you in the coming months to suggest new initiatives in the brain health area and how to think about this. As you've heard from Dr. Satcher, there's a brain health at early age and adolescence. There's a brain health in the teens and the 20s. There's a brain health in midlife, and there's a brain health for healthy aging. And we may segment that and create some grand coalitions around all the organizations dealing with brain health in different contexts. And when you think about concussions for girl soccer players, when you think about autism, when you think about child developmental issues, brain health is an issue for an enormous number of people, but we put them in different buckets. We put them in little cubbies, and we don't have a coherent way to address this issue as a public health issue and to raise brain health as an independent source of attention. When we begin to get a brain vital so that the nurse practitioner can do it just like they take the blood pressure cuff or the temperature, when we get a brain health number So we know our cholesterol number, we know our A1C, we know our pulse. We're going to get a brain health number that says I've got a 75, and that's about normal for my age. But there are a lot of people at 85 at my age, a lot of people at 65 at my age. How do I get to 85? And to figure out what it is we do affirmatively to raise our brain health number, as I think Dr. Chapman put it, how is it that we're going to get brain performance and cognitive vitality in something you can improve, not just be worried that it's going down. So this one's a challenging one. And just before our next panel, we are going to do another This Is Us. Whoop, wait a minute, I should go back to that one. I thought I was going back. Do we have another?
I'm Ann Napleton, founder of Maryland's Legacy and a co-founder of the Us Against Alzheimer's Facebook caregiver community. The one thing I wish people knew about Alzheimer's is that it's so much more than memory loss. This disease manifests itself differently in everyone. It's incredibly unpredictable, affecting personality and causing things like paranoia, delusions, hallucinations, and irrational behavior. It affects executive function, spatial relations, and eventually it affects a person's ability to manage the most intimate activities of daily living.
When the days we have shared are like drops in the sea, I will not forget you. Tomorrow may fade from my memory, but I will never let you. I'm Don Wendorf. Eventually, my mom with Alzheimer's forgot me, but I won't forget her, or my dad with Parkinson's, or my late wife with vascular dementia, or all the other people impacted by Alzheimer's and other dementias. We've got to cure these dreadful diseases. So, to paraphrase Ashley Campbell singing about her dad, Glenn, we'll do the remembering, because we're the us in Us Against Alzheimer's.
Hi, I'm Kimiko Kelly, and I'm with Alzheimer's Greater Los Angeles. And what motivates me to do this work is to just be out there helping people. People are out there, they don't know where to turn to, and it's really a privilege to be able to connect them to resources that are available, and also to let them know there is free help out there, that we can live healthier and we can live with reduced stress and less trauma using the resources that we have out there.
Hi, I'm Brenna Hebner with I Remember Better When I Paint. What motivates me in my fight against Alzheimer's were my mother's words, I remember better when I paint, the catalyst for a film, a book, and a play to help people cope with Alzheimer's through the creative arts. We want everyone to know that these powerful words were the intersection between art, science, and medicine. We are proud to be a part of Us Against Alzheimer's and to ask government, industry, and science to do everything they can to advance the fight. Bravo to Trish and George and their team for all they have accomplished.
Hi, I'm Lisa Alexander. Growing up, my grandmother had dementia, and I couldn't understand why she couldn't recognize me. As I grew to understand the disease, I realized that I wanted to work with my brother to create dementia awareness in the teenagers around me. I hope that we soon find a cure for Alzheimer's.
I am TJ Harvey with Alzheimer's Mississippi, and what motivates me in my fight against Alzheimer's is to provide future generations the opportunity to say the world is free from Alzheimer's. The main thing I wish people knew about Alzheimer's disease is that it is a brain degenerative disease and cannot be contracted from person to person. I am the us in Us Against Alzheimer's because my voice, our voices, are needed to move research and policy forward for those who may no longer have a voice.
So this goes back to the very first panel when Nancy Brinker said, tell your stories. We're getting people to tell their stories. So I'd like to introduce our next panel. This one will be moderated by Merrill Cameron. As I mentioned at the top, Us Against Alzheimer's was founded by 4 individuals, Trish and myself, but also John Dwyer, who you've heard from this morning, and Merrill Cameron, who is president of the Jeffrey Bean Initiative, Jeffrey Bean Foundation Alzheimer's Initiative. She's also a co-founder and board member of Us Against Alzheimer's and a co-founder of Women Against Alzheimer's. So she's got a lot of titles. She's been actively involved in this field for the 22 years she's been taking care of her husband at home, and then in the last 13, 14 years together with Trish and with me. So Merrill, introduce your panel, but thank you for doing what you do.
Come join us. We're going to have a great conversation. We are Innovation in Care in Support of Those Living. We have been sitting all day, and my Apple Watch tells me that we should be standing. So why don't we stand? We have had a rich conversation for our brain, but let's just stand and stretch for a moment. This is behavior modification. No, I think our panelists may lead and sit down. Thank you. It has really been a rich conversation throughout the morning. Nancy Brinker reaching out to us to, again, validate the stories that we have to tell. And then we heard from Novella talking about the tipping point. We're going to lead off this conversation because it's really focused on supporting the patients and the caregivers and families. And I do believe, how many of you have seen I'll Be Me? I do believe that Kim Campbell and her husband Glenn were a tipping point. Kim was as much a star for us. Kim Campbell was as much a star for us as her husband, Glenn Campbell.
Thank you, everybody. That's so kind of you. Thanks, Merrill.
There was not a moment in the film where we did not watch a brave woman supporting her husband and following him and the family into the disease with spirit, playing into the moment. We learn so much from you besides your bravery. For those of us who step out and have very private lives, imagine what it takes for someone in a very public place to step out. But I think what was also so striking in the 151 show tour, Goodbye Tour, was the fear that people would laugh, people would be upset, and it was the embrace that took the disease out of the shadows. So, Kim, it was really quite remarkable. And somebody made a point, well, caregivers, that once they're done, they walk away. Excuse me, this disease does not let us go. So, Kim, do you have any regrets of being so public, because it was such a brave statement, and why do you stay with it now?
Well, I definitely don't have any regrets about going public. I think it was the best choice. Glenn made the choice, and we supported him in it, but it was necessary for him to continue being who he was, to have quality of life and do what he enjoyed. And, when we first got the diagnosis, I said, honey, what's going to happen if you make mistakes on stage, if you mess up? I mean, we don't know what Alzheimer's does. We're just entering this journey. And he said, I'll just tell him I got Alzheimer's disease, like it's no big deal. And, it really, I think, inspired a lot of other people to realize that they can continue living their life and functioning, well into the disease, as we've seen with some other people that are here today living with Alzheimer's. In the early and middle stages, with the right support, you can still have a good life, quality of life, and it was such a gift to us to be able to enjoy those years with Glenn. But it has, does have its drawbacks as well. As we've continued our journey, and the film documented the beginning of our journey, and then when the film ended at the end of 2012, Glenn entered the late stages of Alzheimer's. And it was a really difficult time for us as a family because Glenn, as he entered the late stages, as your husband did, became combative. And so that was very, very challenging for us to take care of him at home. And we eventually made the choice to go into a memory care community. I've heard the term nursing home quite a lot tonight. And that's one of the stigma-ridden terms that we have in our society that I'm trying to raise awareness about. Glenn entered a memory care community, and I say that the whole family joined because it is a family disease, and it's my community too. And so it was such a blessing to us, and he really thrived in that environment and the socialization, the activity. But the journey is different for everybody, and everybody has different needs at different times. But getting back to being a public figure, I did have trolls on the internet that attacked me just viciously for making that kind of decision for our family, not knowing us, not knowing the facility. But I think a lot of it's due to that stigma that is attached to nursing home or long-term care, and they don't realize how many great places there are providing safety and quality of life and round-the-clock medical care for families that are living with dementia. And I think that's one of the innovations that the industry is really stepping up to the plate and trying to meet the needs of families with dementia.
Well, we have a lot of innovators at the table, and what I found so interesting among women entrepreneurs in this space is that it comes from a very personal place to fix something. That's not unlike many women legislators. It's to fix a problem that really impacted their family. Sarah Hoyt is a social entrepreneur. She has gone out of her way to really create connected living. It's broad-based, but the lens is personal because it comes from a space of having had Alzheimer's in her family. Sarah, do you want to pick up the story?
I will. Thank you very much. And I do, just as I start, want to thank George and everybody here. I think this is the most inspiring and amazing group of people to be a part of. And truly, from a public-private partnership, legislative, it's just incredible. So thank you. It is very personal for me, as I know for many in this room. I have it on all sides of my family. I watched my amazing role model, hero grandmother go from chair of the Smith board and chair of the visiting nurse and chair of everything else she touched to forgetting who we were, taking away the car keys, the whole journey we went on together. And but as you say, in that journey, they're themselves, and there's so much that's there. And if we can focus on the living, which is what was very profound as we started our company, to focus on the connecting, to focus on the living, to focus on the respect. They're not dead, they're there. And the day before she passed away, we sang every word of My Way together. And there were things she knew that I knew she knew. And she didn't know who I was, but that was okay because I knew that that was music that was important. So as I look at this journey and the people in this room and the things we can do, I looked around to see what resources there were. On my husband's side of the family, there's early onset. So of course I'm worried about my children and everybody else. And as I looked at ways to connect, as I looked at the enormous problem of isolation that has been pointed out, the millions of people in this country who are fighting alone, Brian, right here, and who's going to take care of me, as you said yesterday, and all the people out there, and yet this is the 21st century. There's technology, there's people, there are loved ones, and so I looked around to try to find what was there, and most of it was about dying or falling or being tracked or being sick, or I'm thinking, well, no wonder no one's connected. This is just completely unfun. I wouldn't do any of this. And so when we started Connected Living, it was just that. And by the way, it's also not about being old. It's multi-generational, it's private, it's family, it's conversation, it's wisdom, it's access to goods and services, and there's a whole story to tell, but our lens was very different. And that's how we started the company.
And what she hasn't mentioned, it's an app. So it's
I
a way to connect, and we will get into the innovation in that space. Lakeland Hogan is a gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. Home Instead Senior Care is a multinational network of franchises specializing in non-medical in-home care for the elderly so that loved ones can stay in their home, that caregivers can be supported through the journey. Lakeland, tell us, one is very high touch because you really send caregivers into the home, but there is a whole digital world out there that you touch as well.
Most certainly. We know that high touch is very important, especially with a disease that can be so very personal to families. So we see the value of that personal touch. But we also know that technology is so integrated in our world today. And so we're currently piloting different technologies in the home on a regular basis, trying to figure out what's going to be the most effective in supporting the person living with the disease and their families. But we've also innovated in a way that we are sharing resources through technology platforms with caregivers across the nation, across the world for free. So we have a helpforalzheimersfamilies.com site that integrates an app. It also integrates a platform that can help loved ones locate somebody who's gone missing or wandered. So we're using technology that already exists as well, Facebook, the internet, different websites, to give families more tools and resources to expand their capacity to provide care, because we know that personal touch is so vital, but that technology can really be an asset to families to provide even better care.
It is really quite remarkable, and we've had a wonderful partnership together with Home Instead in the digital community. They have over 300,000 caregivers that they touch in their space, and they problem solve together. This is a space because you live isolated, so you live in a wireless world. Caregivers tend to trust technology more because, again, we are isolated. It costs for us to move away from our loved ones to get out. So I do want to introduce now Grace Weber. Grace, Karen Gardner. I've made a mistake. Karen Gardner, she was a caregiver to her husband, Jim, with early onset. Do you want to pick up the story?
I would love to. And thank you so much, because a lot of what Kim said, I could have said as well. So thank you. And to touch on the isolation piece and using technology, we were a younger family. My husband was 47 when he was diagnosed. He passed away a year and a half ago in April of 2016 at the age of 52. And we had young children at home all of those years. So I was constantly trying to figure out how to keep their life stable and normal and take care of him and make all of those decisions, like when it was time for him to stop driving. And eventually he did have a violent episode. And with children at home, not knowing when or if that was going to happen, I had to make that decision to put him in a home, which was devastating because not only was I taking him out of his comfortable environment and feeling that guilt, but I was taking him away from his kids and them away from their father. So that was a huge, huge burden. And I can say, as far as utilizing technology, reaching out to other caregivers. I write a blog called Missing Jim, and I also write for Home Instead and do live chats for them to reach out and touch other caregivers, because I think it's so important, not only for the isolation, but the guilt and just the overwhelming sense of burden, because there's no aspect of your life as a caregiver that's not touched. Everything from your social aspect with your friends who tend to stop coming around, or you just don't even know what to say, or you don't have the mental energy to even try to carry on a conversation. And then you just have, to worry about the bills and, oh my gosh, there's dishes in the sink. And for me, having young kids at home, what their schedule was, and then trying to keep Jim in some kind of regular schedule himself, because then that could lead to agitation. And of course, having, you know, a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old at home that were playing sports and having friends over, you know, there was a lot of noise and different things going on. So I have to say it was really important to reach out to other people in that caregiving community who were feeling the same thing. And on my blog, I had people also, not quite at the extent you did, but I had people who would question some of my choices, and also because I did write about some of the intimate things and thoughts and feelings and the frustrations that come along with being a caregiver. I had people that told me I didn't love Jim, and that how dare I, you know, not just put him in a home, but be frustrated with him or get angry with him because he couldn't do something anymore, which of course I already felt guilty, and that's why I was sharing my story and trying to help other caregivers realize it's not this picture perfect thing that you can see on Facebook. It is real life. This is what it's really like, and it's more than just losing keys.
And that's the energy and the conversations that are going on every day, online, in real time, problem solving together. And the point about the former caregiver is none of us want another family to go through what we've gone through. And you share whatever you know to either validate what they're doing in the moment or give them a solution. And it comes, you don't know where you get the strength to do it, but you find it. So thank you so much. Sarah, I just want to have you actually introduce how you've connected in partners, because we've talked about collaboration and partnerships all day. Why don't you introduce Joe Cudicelli? Before that, Joe is with Sodexo. Joe, my mother was a marvelous cook, and I became a very good cook myself. And when she became ill and in my house, I would cook everything that she taught me to make. And she would look at the food and say, I wouldn't eat that. And I'd say, Mother, that's your recipe. And she would say, probably as a Jewish mother, just because I made it didn't mean I liked it. So my question to you, Joe, is how do you manage food service for elder care facilities around the world with all these franchises, and what is the connection?
Well, in the quick introduction, I think that, again, people in this room, and I'm so glad you brought up senior living, what Joe and I share very much is the firm belief we have partners in senior living all over the world, and hundreds of beautiful, amazing communities all over this country that we serve. We have many here in this room who are sponsors of this event as well, Care Right and Sunrise and all these incredible leaders. And our belief, again, when you look at connected living and how are we connected, is that it's not just about that community. So you asked about our technology. We have technologies that light up everything within a community, from the digital signage, the menus, the in-room TV, but we've released an app that's for every single home. And what Sodexo and Connected Living share is the belief that every family wants quality of life, every family wants connection, and that the ability to have your family, your food, transportation, which is another partner with Lyft that we'll talk about. So as we have looked at technology and services together, it's about connecting families and bringing them access to the goods and services that they need to live. And that's our connection, started in senior living. So I'll let you take it away.
So a couple things. You do it carefully and with passion. And know that you're not always going to get it right, by the way. I cook for my 80-year-old Italian mother, and who reminds me that I'll never be as good as her. And I started my career as a chef. And Kim, I do want to say thank you for sharing that there are incredible communities that serve the seniors industry. I started my career nearly 20 years ago working at an Alzheimer assisted living facility. It's my connection to senior living. It's my connection to Alzheimer's. I then realized at a young age that my uncle at 52 years old was diagnosed with Alzheimer's Alzheimer. He died at 56. We know that in his 40s, he showed signs that we didn't recognize. And I think to myself, in the industry that I serve, how can I help drive awareness in a way? And I shared this with Sarah before we came up, not embarrassed about being a for-profit company. But how do we leverage as Sodexo the 75 million consumer interactions we have every day for the betterment of causes like this? And you're going to talk about brain health, and I'm just going to make a comment about brain health, is we start serving children in K through 12 schools. And I know that we're very focused on nutrition in young children. We were one of the first signers of Michelle Obama's initiative on, healthy foods, and there's a lot of changes that are happening, but we're really advocating for the importance of nutrition at a very, very young age. And how do we carry that through the life cycle to make sure that we can look at brain health from a preventative awareness standpoint very early on in the impact that we have as an organization? And as a for-profit provider, and we are a for-profit company, but how do we leverage those resources, again, for advocacy? Because I believe, as I listened and sat here today, George, you need business and industry to stand up, right? To stand up for causes like this and to leverage the resources that they have, leverage their voice as it relates to government officials and the advocacy that we're presenting for us as an organization. But we need to be aligned as an industry to stand up for causes like this. And I really believe that's going to make a difference when businesses take a stand.
Thank you, Joe. I would now like you to meet Nate O'Keefe, who is Rubrics co-founder with Judy Conway. Was started in 2013 to help families in crisis problem solve, be able to make decisions in ways. And we actually went to Nate with a challenge. We wanted to ask the question, how do we connect people to research? Because we have such high screen fail rates, why should people get rejected? The disease is rejecting enough. So we proposed, how could we work together to look at, is clinical research right for us? If it isn't right, maybe we're good for a registry. Maybe we're good in the queue because, again, the pipeline needs to be robust. So Nate, take it away from where your thinking began and how it evolved, and how the dynamic between an advocacy group with whom you worked actually accelerated the development of your technology.
Sure. Thank you, Merrill, for the opportunity to be here today. We met over 2 years ago, and I can pretty honestly say that almost every good thing that has happened to us since then can be traced back to knowing Merrill. And I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room that can say that. We founded Rubric to help older adults and families make difficult care decisions, as Merrill said. These are online tools. We're particularly focused on decisions that arise early in the care continuum. So think about, is it still safe for dad to drive? Is it time for mom to get help at home or consider a move? Is what we're seeing dementia? And we designed these tools to overcome three primary powerful forces. One is a lack of awareness. I don't know what to look for in this world. I'm used to the status quo. The second is uncertainty. I'm noticing some changes, but I don't know if they're a big enough deal. I don't know if it's time to act on those. And the final one is inertia, where I kind of know there's a problem, there's something we should do, but it's really hard to take that next step. It's really hard to kind of overcome those forces to the point of action. And even more so if you feel like you have a lack of information, any lack of confirmation that you're dealing with something that rises to what feels like a crisis level, which often leads to that default to a crisis, defaulting to, well, let's just wait for something bad to happen and then we'll act. And that's not really an acceptable status quo. And so Rubric is an assessment-driven approach. We typically ask 15 to 25 questions in a very conversational tone, and then we synthesize those responses into what we call a decision dashboard, which includes a score. Everybody likes a number. Sometimes it's a risk score, sometimes it's a fit score. We then talk a little bit about the options that are applicable to that, and then we give you this first-person report that is a summary of everything you've told us that can be used to, it's designed to facilitate conversations with other stakeholders, so other family members. Hey, I did this thing online, here's what it told me, what do you agree with, what do you think we still need to work on, and facilitate conversations with care providers. And when we looked at the challenge of clinical research, we previously and still do some work in supporting senior care organizations and helping get people through this process of how do I know it's time to take action and get some additional support or move somewhere where help is available. It's really similar to the challenge of how do I get someone to consider a clinical trial, which is just as opaque, it's just as much something I never really thought I wanted to do, and I have so little information about it. And so we collaborated with Merrill's team and access to a number of folks in this room to work on this tool together to say, what are the challenges here and how can we help people overcome them? So that's we're an 18-question assessment there that gives you your clinical research fit, and it's gentle, it is informing, and it's meant to empower you to feel like you can, in a personalized way, take that next step, whether that's joining a registry or whether that's signing up for an interventional trial.
And because of the public-private dynamic, we're proud to say that the NIA actually piloted the decision tree tool because they had some technical advisory input. This is the way to work because then we get the much bigger reach. The other dynamic is it takes 4 minutes. Is it worth 4 minutes to find out whether it's time to take away the car so you can anticipate the problem? These tools are available. We developed them so they could be shared. We'd like you to think creatively on how you can use them because they're meant to be out there. And the nice thing that I've always excited me about technology, having lived wireless for all these years and working from my upstairs bedroom, was that it bypasses stigma, it bypasses ageism, and it's very private. And any of our work together has really been documented in that respect for the integrity of the family, the authenticity, and we are now, in fact, working with the Mayo Clinic on a study that's coming out with our A-list, and you've seen the promotion, which has people standing up and say, I want to be part of that, I want to beg you to test your product, bring it on, we'll be in the research space with you as partners. And that's why I love the fact that Karen is actually one of your care experts. So I think that is very powerful. The attitude of going into a very saturated space, Kim, you have a great following, but you're very focused on care living. What is the conversation?
Well, like I said before, our film, Glenn Campbell, I'll Be Me, kind of took people along with us on our journey through the early and middle stages of the disease. And when we entered the late stages of the disease, I started a blog called careliving.org to share the rest of my journey. And I started it because I was going through so much, like I said before, and trying to navigate through the crazy stages, the later stages, and having to, I was in crisis to make a decision to go into a memory care community. And so I wanted to share my feelings and my experiences with other people that were going through it too. I joined a support group with other women whose husbands had Alzheimer's because I was so depressed, and I found out that they were all depressed too. That seems to be one of the biggest complaints of family caregivers is depression. So I did my website to encourage other caregivers and to be a source of hope and inspiration and guidance through the caregiving journey. And one of my main missions, we've started the Care Living Foundation now, is to remove the stigma of long-term care through education, to let caregivers know that there are these wonderful options available to them, and also to change perceptions. You mentioned that you felt guilt. And I always try to encourage other caregivers, and I tell them it's important to properly identify your feelings. Most caregivers automatically just reach for the word guilt when maybe what you really were feeling was sadness because you had no control, helplessness. But you should never feel guilty for doing what's right for your loved one and your family, because it is a family disease.
Hold that thought. All right, innovators, how do you take guilt out of an online product for us? Not make us feel more guilty with all the things we have to do. Take away some of our burden and our guilt, please. Sarah?
Well, I think, and I didn't take a moment to really describe what we've built, but what we have built, the Connected Living app, it's free, by the way, so it's something everybody in this room can use. We took 10 years of work with families. We didn't just sort of think it up. We've been working in senior living and home care and listening to families. But it was the whole family unit. To us, the intergenerational piece was critical. Don't call it something different. Don't give them a different piece of technology. Treat everybody with respect. And if I can build something that a 15-year-old, a 50-year-old, and an 85-year-old all love, then we can get the family connected. So the first thing is saying family and respect. And it wasn't around guilt. It was around, I'm connecting with you not because you're older or have a disease or anything. I'm connecting with you because I love you. You're my family. So why don't we do something fun? Let's share some pictures. Let's talk to each other. But this is a private network because the Facebook and Instagram are out there, and it's brilliant, but that's where I can talk to my 2,000 best friends. If I really want to connect with the people I'm closest to, my children and my husband and my best friends and my grandparents, I want something different. And so we started with the privacy, we started with the social, we started with the fun. But of course there's other things that people need, and location's one of them. But this isn't just about my grandmother with Alzheimer's. Of course I need to know if she's in her apartment or if her care worker got there. And so I can draw a little circle around her apartment and I can attach people on the app and I can see if she's there or if the care worker's there, if my brother's been there. And that's just a little check and balance. But I do the same thing with my 17-year-old or my 15-year-old to make sure they've gotten to school. I'm on a plane, as always, flying somewhere, and I can see that Samantha's made it to school. So this is a whole family thing, and by the way, they can see that I landed safely. So it's not just about one person, it's about a family unit. But then, of course, what do families need? And they need access. They need food. They need transportation. We're partnered with Lyft, so we have Lyft family rides on our app, and I can get my kids, my father, my grandmother a ride, whether it's a hair appointment, a doctor's appointment. And we have an absolutely beautiful feature on the app, which is the thing people were maybe crying out for most, and the CEO of the company is back there, Wouter, with circles. We have concierge. I've never had a personal assistant in my entire life, and I now have a personal assistant, and so does everybody else who downloads the app and does that little upgrade. So now we can connect, we can communicate, we can inspire. So we asked everybody, we put in your bags, download the app, and put in the USA2 code, because if anybody takes us up on concierge or food or Lyft rides, we're giving money back to USA2.
Great.
So that, so for us, when you talk about how do we do this to allay the guilt, you bring the whole family in. Once you empower the kids, I can't rip my children away from their grandparents. And it doesn't just become one person's burden. And so I think, we've tried to take the stigma out of everything. We called it Connected Living. We incorporated everybody. And it's not just about one person we're pointing to, although obviously there's someone in our midst who can use absolutely everything we have, from the transportation to the food to the inspiration to the connection.
Thank you. Lakeland, you're into the high touch because you are coming into our lives, into our homes. What are the challenges and what is the need? Because you are providing caregivers that come into environments. How do you train them? What is the infrastructure to support that?
Yeah, so we recognize that there's certain challenges that come with Alzheimer's disease or dementia diagnosis. And so we take great pride in the training that we provide to our caregivers. So before we send caregivers into the home, they undergo full comprehensive training program, and then we add on that layer of dementia care training on top of that. So we teach them what is Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and how does it affect the brain and the aging process? What's the progression of the disease? And then we talk through the different behavioral symptoms that they might see, and tips and strategies on how to help with those different symptoms and behaviors. And then we also teach them about the person's life story, because we recognize that the individuals that we work with, they were people long before that they had this disease, and we can use that past and their story to help provide highly personalized care to those that we serve in the home. So we combine the knowledge and the education from the program that we've developed with experts, some of them sitting in this room, and we have combined that education knowledge with that high touch to support the individual with the disease and their family. So we're also, the caregivers a lot of times will say that they teach the families some tips. Maybe they found that there's a certain activity that really helps mitigate agitation or anxiety in their loved ones. So they're helping to educate and empower the family as well to provide that high touch care.
So let me ask you, because in the earlier segment when we talked about the brain health, we talked about the exercise project. Well, look at all the fitness trainers, if we certified them as first responders or as data collectors, or we brought in other professions, speaking to what Joe did, or turned caregivers into longitudinal data collectors. You validate what they do in the space, but we're also linked to the research that makes a huge statement. Are we pushing the envelope too much for a company to consider that type of dynamic within the training?
You know, I think that there's so much possibility in this space, and something that we're doing at home instead is really leveraging data in a variety of ways. So what sort of interventions are working, taking all the knowledge that we have collected over the years and turning that into ways that we can provide better care to those that we serve. So I don't think that's out of the question. I think anything is possible, especially with this group of experts. And so we are using data in a variety of ways, and that could be something we add down the road.
So I want to ask you, Nate, how do you manage guilt? Not personally, but...
Wow. So we think a lot about the guilt economy the personal guilt economy in being a family caregiver. And so when we started this company about 4 years ago, I've got a close friend. She's an advisor to the company. I worked with her for a number of years, and she's been the caregiver for her mother for the past 3 or 4 years with some pretty rapid cognitive decline. And the first thing she said to me is, don't create one more thing for me to fail at. And that's and you got a lot of people in this space that are, especially in the startup space, that are creating new things that seem like just the thing. They seem like it's going to be the perfect thing. If I only had this system or I only had this product, this would have made everything easier. But it's really hard to think about how that applies to that personal guilt economy. And her two examples were, 4 years ago, there were a lot of people that were doing care logging platforms. So this is what I did every hour of the day, and this is going to create a data set. This is going to create something we can share. And her take on that was, the first time I don't do that, the first day I forget to do that, I now feel bad about myself for not having done that, and I have failed at one more aspect. It took everything I had to just get through the day. Do I now need to go into this system and do this? If I don't, I failed at it. And the second one is it was a little bit harder for me to think about, but it was also just as interesting. And I'd be curious to get, Sarah, your take on this, because I think for some people, a data feed is exactly what they want. And I'm one of those people. But we've talked with enough people where if you've got sensors and systems that are constantly providing feedback on somebody that might be remote or somebody that might be, that you care about, you've now created this data stream that needs to be consumed. And there may be days when, it's all you could do to get to the end of the day, and having this data stream that you feel like you need to check in, and it's kind of like a baby monitor in your crib. I didn't have that with my kids, or like a video monitor where, do I need to watch this all the time now? If I don't, am I failing in some aspect of this? And I don't think it's an easy answer, because it's not like everybody has their own fixed level of this. It fluctuates. Sometimes I want that, sometimes I don't want that. And I think we kind of come back to this rule of create things that are there when we need them, and don't bug us or nag us either actively or passively when we don't need them. And that's a really tough balance, even with technology and machine learning and AI. And I think a lot of it is just surfacing things in gentle ways so they're there, making them available, but then not making them compulsory or in either an active or passive way.
So we have guilt we're taking care of, or considering at least, and we have the issue of time and efficiency with your product. I'd like to ask Kim a very personal question, because when you look at a beautiful woman who has gone through so much, can you tell us why you just didn't want to escape it and rather live in it and continue to fight it?
You mean since Glenn passed?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did think about that. There was a part of me that never wanted to talk about or think about or read about Alzheimer's again. But I fear for myself, I fear for my children, and I've become a part of the Alzheimer's community that's been so supportive to us through this entire journey, and I feel a responsibility, you know, to continue to fight to find a cure and to help other caregivers. And my heart goes out to other people that are going through it. I mean, it's like I joined a club that no one wants to be in, but but now that I am, you know, it's my family, and so I'm just committed to it, and I'm so thankful to Us Against Alzheimer's and all of you, for everything you're doing. I mean, we're all in this together, and we're all on the same team, and I know we're going to win.
Let's open up the floor for some questions. Just raise your hand and we'll come to you. I do want to follow up with Joe on a question. We were talking about the Mediterranean diet, and as people age, the olfactory senses are in fact the last to go. Then why is food in facilities taste so bad?
That's a, you know, one is, I always say this, so I want you to have this perspective. For those that are living in communities, residential communities, and think about the fact that if you ate at your favorite restaurant, and you can think of your favorite restaurant right now, 365 days a year, 3 meals a day, okay? Do you think you'd have a bad meal once in a while, right? But think about that. And so I think one of the challenges that we face as an industry, and one of the challenges that we face as an organization, and it's something that we study, is how do you make that dining experience something that links to their quality of life? And there's tremendous change in the industry. And again, there's some great leaders in the industry in this room who are focused on how do we make that change? How do we improve variety? And you know, how do we improve the experience? And so you'll go to communities today where it's a complete retail experience, and so you know, there's different venues and multiple opportunities to dine differently. So I think that there's a tremendous transformation happening on the focus of. Remember, it was really the monotony of what you're doing that also drove that. And then the other thing that I just want to say in terms of, go back to brain health for one more second, is Sodexo is the largest employer of dietitians in the world. And one of the things that we learned, that even in the senior living community, you need to provide education. And I always laugh because, probably one of the most popular dishes that we serve is not the healthiest dish, right? And we'll do the education, and then I'll go visit one of the dining rooms where we're serving that evening, and everyone's, ordering crab cake, right? And it's fried. And we said, well, I just told you that you need to eat a Mediterranean diet. But how do you, create educational opportunities very early on, again, and link it to the preventative behavior on brain health? I think it's really important that as an industry we begin to focus on education.
I wasn't really picking on you because it's really attached to guilt. Think
Sure.
about it. It's personal
Meryl,
guilt whether you should be at home or not.
I just got to tell you that the food where Glenn was incredible. It was so much better than my cooking. He was doing way better there than at home. He used to say that my cooking was so bad, a swarm of flies got together and fixed the screen door. So they grow their own food there. It's at Abe's Garden in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a new memory community, and it's all organic, and I used to enjoy eating with him there very much, much better than my house.
I think the point of engaging our community, whether it's in the research process, which we are trying to do, the missing piece in so much of this, and with industry as well, is input. And I will have to say thank you to Michael, thank you to those living with dementia, because their input helped us refine our decision tree tool. It's vital because it has to be relevant to everyone in the community. So we listened to Michael, we listened to Greg, we hear you because you're our touchstone, and we have to be sensitive to that. So there's a constant sensitivity training. One of the reasons we were also attracted to these tools, in the Hispanic community, the cell phone, mobile is critical. Not web-based, but mobile. So anything that we look at has to have that component. The other missing piece is that when they talk about tell your story, in research, they don't look at it that way. We all have stories to tell, but researchers rely on evidence-based data. And if it's soft or anecdotal, it's too often recognized, but it can't be used. So one of our goals is to validate our data. So think of your story as data with soul. Try to wrap your hands around it. Would you offer your story attached to a research initiative if you were telling your story, but it was translated in a way that could be used by the research community to advance cures that we need, or we could tell them what matters most so that we are part of the conversation. We would have much more respect for the industry and what they do if we understood the discipline in the research community. So I think we can learn from each other, but this has been a marvelous example. The technology is an enabler. Sarah, you're enabling us to do it faster. You're my virtual assistant.
But I think what was really important and what I loved hearing from you is that we have always said high tech, high touch, because it's not just having the vehicle. Every family member has a cell phone, so this is an obvious place to go. But the high tech, high touch, everything we do, we have personal support behind the scenes. We have 24/7 call center. I have my amazing head of operations here who works out in all the communities and with the homes that we serve. So I think this whole notion of high tech, high touch, we're bringing the technology so we can have higher touch. And I think the other thing, I've been so inspired. This whole couple days hearing about Trish. I never met her, but this sense of yesterday's dream is today's reality. You know, everybody told us this wasn't going to happen. You can't do it, no one's going to connect, and seniors definitely aren't going to connect, and the caregivers don't want it, and everybody told us no, 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 no. Okay, well, fine. So, but I need to connect with my family, and we live at a distance, so let's just try it, because that's the case of millions of people all over the world. And lo and behold, you bring people something that solves something. It's high tech, it's high touch, it's family, it's community, it's voice. Of course they're going to do it. I mean, I was telling in that story yesterday, we had a building of people they'd given up on. They weren't showering, they weren't dressing, they weren't coming out of their rooms. And we gave them a t-shirt and a tablet and a connection, and they're logging in 9 or 10 times a day. One woman's sleeping with her tablet. One won't take her shirt off because she feels like she's part of something. Nobody's gone to the hospital in 90 days, and they were the most frequent visitors to the hospital. And I'm looking around the room saying, are you kidding me? I mean, that was it wasn't even a good piece of technology. We were being given these slates to use, but the point was all of a sudden they went from feeling isolated and forgotten to connected, and it was the simplest thing. So I just feel like we have this collectively an idea whose time has come. We have a group, public-private partnerships who care about solving this disease, and we can't just give up on people and think they're not going to connect. And I really think that technology can be a really powerful piece of it. And the other cool thing about that is that everybody I've heard from today, and I can't wait to talk with Lakeland more, I can't wait to talk with everybody about what they've built, is you can connect it. So the fabulous brain health program that's out there, well, let's put it on the app so everybody can access it, and your series of questions, and getting food to people in their homes, we can do this. So I just, you know, I just feel like the naysayers are wrong because collectively this room is going to do something about this. So
You
thank
definitely
you.
sound like at one point you headed the PTA. Thank you so much to our panel. We will do this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love that last speech. We can do this. So just to connect what you just heard to what you're going to ask for tomorrow, if you go to your asks, you'll find that the act that Capito is going to introduce, and will be joined by a number of other co-sponsors, is basically going to deal with care navigation coordination, respite care, a variety of coverages, and 529, for those of you who have 529 accounts for the education of your kids. Basically, you put money into a state-run 529 account. It accumulates income tax-free, and so long as it's distributed for education, it comes out tax-free. So we're trying to amend 529 to actually permit people to put money in for care costs, at least for very early onset victims. And the reason that we're keeping it to an early age, like 50, is not because we don't want to extend it older and older, but the more it costs government, and so we balanced trying to get our nose under the tent, so to speak, with the cost to government. So we will start with here, and then over time, we hope to have savings accounts so that families can deposit money into a 529 account, allow it to accumulate, and come out for care costs in ways that the family as a whole, not just one person, but families as a whole, or even friends, can contribute to the care costs of families. But so you'll see that we have this on the agenda. There's one other thing that Susan Collins mentioned last night. She mentioned the RAISE Act. Now, this is an act that essentially establishes a NAPA-like structure for caregiving. So a national strategic plan for caregiving. You know, a set of goals, a set of metrics to be established by HHS for caregiving. A set of funding mechanisms for caregiving. So you may be asked, it's not in our materials, but this is nothing more than NAPA for caregiving, and boy, do we support it. So it's passed the Senate now, so this is only an ask for people on the Hill, but it is an ask, and if you're asked about it, the answer is yes, very much support it. Not that it's going to have an immediate impact, but just like NAPA didn't have an immediate impact in 2011, it has had an impact in 5 or 6 years, and so this will be a significant step forward. A couple of other things. There is a Care Research Summit coming up in about 2 weeks, where for the first time, we are going to deal at a national level, both public sector and private sector, academic and private actors, to try and identify what are the best care practices that we ought to encourage greater quality of care, quality of life for those living with the disease as well as caregivers. And we're sort of been charged with helping with implementation of the recommendations that come out of that. So we will be very active, increasingly active in sort of the care space, so to speak, to be cryptic, simple about it. We're also advocating in the outside of the policy piece of this. These are pretty simple things. We're trying to keep them simple so the government gets comfortable getting into the care space in the way that we're suggesting tomorrow. But we're also advocating with the senior living industry that they begin to extend the quality care that they provide inside these facilities outside their walls, so that they provide a community-based, home-based care support for those in the communities around senior living properties, both profit and nonprofit. So we'll be active in the sort of the care space, and this is one, as I said at the outset, where we don't want to lose our focus. We don't want to spend all our time on it. But this is so critical. And we know that the drugs that are coming through the pipeline, or even the lifestyle interventions that we would like to introduce in combination with potential drugs, are not going to be the answer, 100% of the answer for a very long time. And so we have to get in and make sure that our community is supported in every way we can, both with policy interventions, with working with government agencies and with private sectors to implement the best recommendations on how to improve care, as well as advocating with the actors in the industry. And the invitation from Lakeland Hogan to basically say, we know a lot about this. A lot of it is just bringing people together to think through what the strategies ought to be. So we will be in this space too. So with that said, it's been a very nutritious day. It's been a very long day, and I commend virtually everyone for staying so long, because you could have left at any point in time. But every panel seemed to be well constructed, have a coherent message coming out of it, and the combination of everything was really quite inspiring to me, as I learned a lot from all the panelists that came and basically described what they were describing. A reminder, we will have in the next several days an audio and video podcast of each of the panels, so you can remember your notes, but in fact, and remember what you took away, but you're going to have a chance to dip back in on panels that are most interest to you to really, sort of process more of what you heard today, because a lot came at you all day today. We only do 2-day summits, one for communities of color, but one's more general. Although, as I'm saying, communities of color by 2030 are going to be the general. So we may collapse some of this. But it's been a very powerful day. Tomorrow morning, 8:30, sharp, Rayburn 2044, because Nancy Pelosi said she's showing up at 8:30, sharp. And so if you want to hear her remarks, I would recommend you get there 15 minutes early. There's a little security stuff at the Rayburn building, and depending on the day, 8:30 is a little early because most offices set a lot of stuff at 10. But in fact, there are security lines outside of Rayburn, and so to get there and be in a room by 8:30, you had got to get to Rayburn by 8 to 8:15 to make sure that you can accommodate a 10 or 15 minute wait at the security lines. Rayburn 2044 at 8:30. If you haven't got your Hill packets, you're not going to know where to go and when to go tomorrow, so get your Hill packets. And again, you're going to have bipartisan Hill House people tomorrow morning with Nancy Pelosi and Tom Cole. With that said, thank you. Thank you for being here. I hate to clap back at an audience because Trump does it, but notwithstanding that, as a Republican, I thank you. We'll see you tonight. Tonight, 6:30, cocktails, sort of downstairs on the other side of the building. I know you're going to want to probably go get refreshed, change, whatever you want to do. But 6:30 cocktails on the 14th Street side. That's the other side of this building at the ground level. See you tonight at 6:30.